Our story begins with flashing data on a digital screen, scant information about a humanoid form called Thermo, the word echoing in the silence of the control room. The only certainty is a distant planet called TA-457, lost in the vastness of the centric system, a place shrouded in mystery about which he knows very little. A man examines the information card cautiously, his gaze scanning each line of data and his expression denoting concern. 6 arms. How strange, he said. His tone was full of warning, since a creature with such anatomy could represent a potential danger. As he handed the file back to the scientist at his side, the man continued to think that he shouldn't worry unnecessarily, as he had previously made contact with the Nanka people, and they looked the same, but they turned out to be friendly. Seconds later, the scientist asks him, calling him by his name Jake, if before dedicating himself to the commercial area he had served as a soldier. Then Jake, who we know will be the Prota, answers that indeed, and that he had already retired 2 years ago, to which the scientist tells him that it is no wonder he has a good physique. The scientist asks him if he knows any more soldiers working for the company, to which Jake replies that he does, and that they are old acquaintances of his, who are also loyal and responsible. Finally, the conversation between the two ends, wishing Jake success in his mission. Moments later, we see the spacecraft entering orbit, beginning the journey. Until in the distance, the stars can be seen in the immensity of the galaxy. Then, inside the ship, the microwave just sounds. When Jake gets closer, he burns his hand because it's too hot. Then take out the contents of it. While he sits eating, looking out the window, he thinks that he can't get used to the emptiness of the universe, even though he has been working as a merchant for a year. Then, as he holds his military dog tag, Jake thinks that he hopes it arrives soon, since he's already been on the ship for 3 months, and his mind starts to wander, which is something that can be a problem. We then see him saying out loud that there may still be primitive life forms alive in the jungle, as human remains with gunshot wounds have been found before. Jake is presenting his point of view at a meeting table with holograms of other people, while he tells them that perhaps the proto-creatures evolved to wear human skin and use weapons. One of the holograms informs him that 300 years have passed since humans left Earth and now live in AKVAT, so it would be strange if primitive creatures were still alive. Then others tell him that he doesn't understand how the world works, and that he's naive, among other things. They just make fun of him, something that frustrates and disappoints Jake. After that, Jake gets up and leaves the place, and on the way he meets a companion who asks him if he is really enthusiastic. Jake answers yes after nodding to the captain. They then walk down the corridor, while the captain informs him that he is aware that Jake suggested improving security and asks him if he is afraid. And he replies that there might be primitive life on the home planet, but the captain tells him it's impossible. To which Jake insists, how can one be so sure? And the captain, with a laugh, tells him that his ancestors finished them all off. And so we see a war scene of some soldiers shooting at some strange, tentacled creatures, so it seems that perhaps humanity really achieved its mission of exterminating the creatures. But Jake insists that how is it possible to find some remains of gunshot wounds? And it is questioned whether they must have been other humans. The captain tells him that the humans who live in the jungle have no idea what is going on, but because of that, they are subversive people. He also adds that they are people who argue that they could coexist with other native life forms. Suddenly we see how Jake shoots the captain for telling him that they are sacrifices, while Jake questions him for saying that, yes, perhaps the whole situation is due to a political issue. But we immediately see that he only wanted to do that, but no, and he asks him since when he knows that. Jake is disappointed when the captain replies that he has known since he was very young. The captain gives him a supportive gesture, explaining that it's a fact everyone in the organization knows about, and that he should leave the matter as it is, not to worry, as well as the security issue, and also giving him a warning about discussing matters that aren't his business. In addition, the capital gives him advice, because he wants him to last a long time in the organization. Frustrated, Jake thinks he thought the captain was looking out for the good of humanity when he joined the army. Then, Jake is watching the rainfall. We then see a thought from Jake, in which he says that he considered himself a lower-class person for not knowing anything. Back on the ship, we can see that it was all a flashback of Jake. Then he gets up after finishing eating, thinking that if he continues looking out the window, he will have more negative thoughts. Back in the crew cabin, Jake reads more about the Thermo tribe. Thus we discover that they are a super advanced race to negotiate with the Galactic Federation, but unable to escape from the planet TA-457 because they do not have the necessary technology. And the good thing is that they can exchange the planet's raw material, sulfur, for technological energy. Suddenly, Jake receives a notification that he is close to reaching his destination. While watching from the cockpit approaching planet TA-457. A little tired, Jake is happy to finally reach his destination. Without wasting time, the protagonist puts on his jacket as a coat and plans to contact the tribe. Suddenly, something unexpected happens that surprises Jake. The ship enters the planet's atmosphere, falling at high speed, setting the ship on fire due to gravitational friction. Jake immediately assumes that the planet's atmosphere is unstable. While deciding to land quickly, the computer alarms sound, detecting the fire on the ship. Jake takes his helmet, while the computer continues to indicate a state of emergency. Without wasting any more time, follow the protocol and try to send a signal to the planet. As the ship is enveloped, Jake continues with his helmet, trying to send a message. Without receiving a response, the protagonist laments, believing that his death will be in vain. And so the ship crashes into the planet. Although apparently nothing has happened to Jake. However, a humanoid figure to be holding a part of Jake. Then Jake wonders what's going on and that he's very thirsty. Seconds later, we see Jake, without a scratch, but completely without clothes. But when he regains consciousness, he is being carnally taken by a figure. Soon Jake is screaming with pleasure. And while he tries to understand what is happening and has many doubts, he tries to make everything stop. And in front of him, he finds a humanoid figure of the Thermo tribe. Jake is completely exposed. But the situation remains, and we see that it is violently taken by the entity. Despite his efforts, Jake can't stop him and asks him what he's doing to him. While in another shot he can see 3 hands holding Jake's body. The protagonist wants it to stop, but is filled with pleasure. The scene continues over and over again, without seeming to stop. Jake is noticeably tired and with half-closed eyes, not knowing what's happening. In another scene, we see a shot of a kind of cave, and seconds later Jake is on the bare ground. Then he tries to sit down, while asking what is happening. So Jake doesn't understand how he got to a cave and why he's there. Suddenly, frightened, Jake looks at marks on his body, and he wonders who the footprints on his skin belong to. And we see a flashback of the moment when the humanoid hand holds Jake's leg. Then the protagonist touches his face, while thinking that enough time has passed, because he now has a beard. Then he touches the ground between his hands, and it turns out to be sand. And when he stands up, he believes that the soft sand has served as a kind of bed. A few seconds later, a liquid runs between his buttocks, and Jake feels some pain, which makes him unable to stand for long, and he returns to the ground. In pain, Jake feels he can't move his body comfortably, and he complains that the back of his body hurts from his back to the end. Frustrated, he wonders what is happening, what happened to his ship, and that he needs to communicate with someone. So Jake claims that the guy who attacked him is from that planet, and so the marks on his body would make sense, and he's sure it must all be a misunderstanding. And he believes that perhaps because they are a superior race, they only wanted to outrage another race from another planet. Suddenly, Jake's face is covered by a brightness that prevents him from seeing well, and he wonders why the sun's rays are so bright. So as he continues sitting, he understands that this is the reason why he is so thirsty, and that surely if he leaves the cave for a short period of time, he would surely faint. While swallowing saliva due to dehydration, the figure from before appears before him. Jake doesn't know what to do, and he just wonders if it will be that humanoid of the Thermo race. Then he remembers a little of the information he had read and thinks that in person the Thermos are more terrifying. While he details it, he thinks that their skin is like basalt. Without saying anything, Jake just thinks that despite looking terrifying, he considers them attractive, while the creature only makes a sound that cannot be deciphered. However, Jake, since he doesn't understand him, assumes that he doesn't speak his language, and while he explains it in detail, he thinks that he only has 2 arms and not 6. Suddenly, the Thermos gets too close to Jake, and Jake just asks if he can see with those eyes. Then without saying anything, the Thermos charges Jake. Jake is annoyed that the creature is carrying him. Suddenly, Jake is staring at black holes in the air, from which arms begin to emerge. Little by little, up to 6 arms begin to emerge. Suddenly, Jake is on the ground and begins to be caressed by all the arms, and the Prota tells the Thermo that he wants to talk. But without saying anything, the Thermos grabs his crotch. Then he opens him legs, but Jake insists on wanting to talk first. But even without answering him, the Thermos opens his legs and takes him with its body, while Jake insults him. However, the Thermos shows no sign of anything. He just holds his hands tightly, and Jake tells him not to do it. But despite Jake's efforts to resist, he can't do so, since the thermo is much stronger. And he puts his fingers between his buttocks, causing some pleasure to Jake, something he can't avoid. Despite his constant efforts, Jake tries to mediate with the creature, but it doesn't stop, and Jake continues trying to stop it. However, the creature is overstimulated and shows it to Jake, letting him see what's coming. Jake, at that moment, believes that the thermos is a fiery alien, and without saying anything, the thermos takes Jake. Then the protagonist tries to explain to him that it is not the right way, nor the right hole. But although the protagonist insists on explaining it, the thermo attacks him, something that causes Jake a lot of pain. But the thermos shows no signs of stopping. Jake begs him to stop, but the creature gives him no respite. And on the contrary, he continues doing what he does with greater strength. Jake can only beg. Then a tongue is passed over Jake's face in the best style of the Venom character. The thermo's tongue is extremely long. Jake wants to die, before continuing with the situation, and it seems that Jake is not entirely happy, and begs him to stop, but the thermos is at its maximum, and can hear noises coming from the thermos. Jake begs him to please stop, but he only receives another caress with the creature's tongue. So Jake thinks that even though he was a soldier, that didn't prepare him for so much pain. After a moment, Jake is back on the ground, while thinking that since the creature is not human, it would be a risk to try to confront it, which is why he can't get his body to react. All this while he's remembering his encounter with the creature. While he continues meditating, he admits that he likes the company of the thermos. Jake is also concerned about whether the weather outside the cave will be the same as inside, and he is aware that during meals it reaches extreme levels, although he likes the weather during the day because it is pleasant and warm. To all of you, it's like being a giant baby in a natural womb. While talking to himself, he thinks about how it is possible to have a cool head in his situation. Little by little, he regains some strength until he gets up. As he walks, a strange liquid comes out of his back. But Jake just thinks that this whole situation is something unexpected and amazing. Suddenly, a drop of liquid is heard falling, something that arouses the curiosity of the prota. Then he assumes that the noise he heard must be the sound of water, so he decides to investigate the cave. While walking, he manages to find the source of the spring, and he runs straight to the water since he is thirsty. Without wasting any more time, he submerges his face in the water. And be thankful for the vital liquid, as this way he will be able to survive a little longer. However, the doubt arises as to whether this water will be drinkable, or will it cause any reaction to his human body. But he also succumbs to the idea that if he doesn't drink water, he might die from dehydration. Little by little, the water is poured over his body. Water is placed on his back and lower part, and takes advantage of cleaning his parts. He tries to clean off any traces the thermos might have left, but he feels a lot of pain. Likewise, the red marks on his skin still persist, like burns. Jake tries to cheer himself up, saying that he can solve the problem and return. Once again, the protagonist is on the ground, a little sunburned. While wondering if the creature is not aware that humans need water and food to survive, Jake also knows that there are supplies on his ship, but leaving the cave without protection can be deadly. He is also frustrated by not knowing where his ship is. Suddenly, Jake turns to the side because of a noise he heard. It's the thermos that has returned, holding something in its arms. Jake just thinks he's back. Then the creature drops what looks like rocks in front of the prota, and Jake doesn't know what that is, or what it means. But suddenly, the creature's hand touches his face, giving him one of the things I brought, but the protagonist doesn't know what to do with it. So he asks if it is food, or if he can understand his words. When he doesn't receive a response, he tries to taste what the thermos brought him. Then Jake gets angry and tries to throw the object at him, telling him it's not food. But when he tries, he is held tightly by the creature. Then the protagonist gets frustrated, and he just tells him if he really should eat that. When he tries it, the taste is like fresh clay. With each bite, he tries to recognize the flavor, and the closest thing he can find is that of burnt cooked plants. With each bite, he feels its flavor improve, comparing it to that of the spaceship. Jake is very tired, and he comes to the conclusion that at least the thermos doesn't want to destroy him, and he wonders what he wants then. A blowing sound is heard, and the protagonist senses that the creature sighed or yawned, but they still cannot communicate. As he continues eating, Jake wishes he could understand him so he could insult him, but he only resigns himself by eating. After finishing, Jake thanks him for the kind gesture. The alien being only makes a sound, but because it has no facial features, that scares the protagonist a little. Despite everything, Jake asks him if he's going to eat too. And he tries to explain to him in vain that humans generally eat 3 times a day, and not all at once, but in response he only gets a lick on his face. And again he licks him face. Jake fearfully tries to tell him to wait, and he tells him that after eating, people do nothing, because it can upset their stomach, but the creature ignores him and runs its tongue over his chest. So Jake insists on begging him to please stop doing those things, but the creature quickly grabs him by one leg, and without wasting any more time, he shows him what he has prepared for him. Seconds later, Jake is lying on his back on the ground, trying to mediate with the creature, before the inevitable happens, but he only feels a firm and powerful arm that makes him lean completely against the ground. Jake turns his face trying to explain that he doesn't like what he's doing, and has no reason to do it. But those words are not enough for the creature, who subdues him by surprise. Seconds later, only the sound between pleasure and pain can be heard in the immensity of the cave. And the reason for those noises was that the Thermo was getting intimate with the protagonist again. Jake looks very exhausted, and he doesn't know how many days have passed since he arrived on the planet. While he thinks that since he arrived on the planet for the Federation's trade treaty, he has only had fluid exchanges with the thermos, which so far has not been able to communicate merely for physical contact. Jake asks him if he's going to stop. Because he has a lot, he's exhausted and wants to go to the bathroom. But the creature ignores it and continues with what it is doing. And Jake places his hand on his chest, trying to make the thermos stop, and he thinks that despite everything the thermos has been kind, although it remains alert for if the creature hits it. Suddenly Jake realizes that he is just being used, and that is not nice at all. The creature then carries him in its 6 arms next to its chest, while continuing to hold him with its body, and everything that happens makes Jake question if he is going crazy. So with part of the Thermo's body inside Jake, and without letting go, the protagonist tries to analyze how this primitive tribe cannot communicate, and apparently only know how to do one thing. At this point, Jake is disappointed that they can't communicate enough to understand each other. Suddenly, Jake feels one of the arms grab his member, but the protagonist immediately exclaims in pain that the alien food apparently disagrees with him. Then the Thermo places it on the ground, there Jake supposes that maybe it was the water he ingested. And Jake, trying to maintain his composure, reflects that it is normal to arrive on a planet and acquire diseases during the acclimatization process, and that with a little rest, he can recover little by little. But Jake tells Thermo how he can recover if he doesn't let him rest. Then the protagonist asks him what his name is, and although he is aware that he does not understand him, at least he wants to know his name. After a pause, Jake admits that he is aware that he asked a stupid question. Suddenly we see the thermos submerged in a shiny liquid, and Jake asks him if he's going to take a bath, and that it looks like lava, where he's submerged. To which Jake tries to understand that it looks like a hot spring, but the creature's body also seems indestructible. Then the protagonist sees a stream next to the lava, and thinks that maybe he could shower there, but he would probably get burned immediately. Seconds later, Jake holds a container with water, and collects some of that water. While he says he will wait for it to cool down a bit so he can wash himself. And as he holds the plate, he thinks he can use certain objects as he wishes, and although he wants to ask the thermos questions, he knows he won't get answers. So while crouching down, Jake points to the plate and asks the creature how he made it, with the same clay, and if he used any tool to make that utensil. But he gets no response from the creature, which only remains inert in the liquid that looks like lava. Which is why Jake feels silly for trying to communicate. Then just remember, every time he interacted with the creature, and instead of responding, the only thing they do is make the creature use him as an object of carnal desire. And that frustrates the protagonist. In another intimate scene, Jake asks him in vain if he sees him as a reproduction machine. And being between the strong and enormous hands of the thermos, Jake resigns himself to thinking that maybe it's not so bad, and it could be worse because the creature could exterminate him. In a flashback of the protagonist, we see him remember his childhood, running away with food. Then we look at his time in the army and the discrimination based on rank. So with what has happened in his life, he thinks this is the most insignificant thing. While the thermos places his hand on Jake's chest, he asks him what he does. And he tells him that with his strength, if he continues pushing, he could make his organs explode. And suddenly, the creature tenderly runs its tongue along Jake's chin. And this one prepares for what is coming, not without first asking him if he hadn't just bathed a few moments before. But the thermos doesn't respond, and with both hands, without stopping passing his big tongue all over Jake's body, he squeezes his crotch and brings him closer to him, opening Jake's rear hole, while he thinks that if they continue like this, he will never be able to recover his energy. While worried, he thinks about when he will possess it again. And without further loss of time, the creature takes Jake, while he begs him to please do it, but with care and tenderness. As the thermos takes hold of him, Jake feels his stomach boiling, his guts burning inside. But the thermos just keeps on doing its thing, and Jake suddenly realizes that the creature is well endowed. What makes his body vibrate? And while all this is happening, the creature doesn't let go for a second. On the contrary, it grips Jake's wrists tightly. Then, like a doll, the thermos turns the protagonist sideways, without stopping doing what it does. And as if he had recharged his batteries, he makes movements with great speed and strength. Then Jake tells him that his space is very small for his large size, but at the last second the protagonist asks him not to stop. In one scene, we see the inner part of Jake's body, and it seems that now the protagonist is starting to like the situation. Suddenly he grabs his abdomen and feels something inside him. He then regrets having told the creature not to stop, and again he has changed position. Now Jake asks for more. And despite feeling pain, he is enjoying what the Thermo does. He even tells him he wants more. Although a doubt arises in the mind of the protagonist, and that is what would happen if he were discovered in those acts. 1 minute now, Jake doesn't want any more, and asks him to stop while tears run down the eyes of the protagonist. It's a bittersweet feeling, because he wants it to stop, but at the same time he wanted to continue. And all this while, the thermos shows no signs of fatigue. And Jake is in a state of enjoyment. He even starts to make noises of satisfaction. Which makes him wonder if it's strange that all this makes he feel so good. Which makes him feel a little bad, because he doesn't feel guilty about what's happening. While the thermo continues without stopping. Without stopping, Jake feels that the thermos has been releasing a lot of liquid inside it. Liquid that, by the way, Jake says is boiling like lava. The protagonist looks at the creature and tells him that's enough. And he wants this hot hell inside him to stop. And it seems that everything is over. Exhausted, Jake thinks that despite his age, he shouldn't be crying. And flashing back in his mind everything the thermos has done, he cries with emotion that everything hasn't been so bad. Once again, Jake becomes frustrated, putting his hands on his head, while he questions whether what is happening is normal. And although he feels he is not really suffering, it is in fact a torture that is not so bad, and at least it leaves him de-stressed. Jake sitting in a corner, conflicting thoughts come to his mind about his situation. In another scene, we see Jake with a piece of food that looks like mud near his lips, and then he's smiling while he eats it. A little more rested, he reflects on how frustrating and uncomfortable it is to spend all day doing nothing, without television, entertainment, friends, and even without work. So bored, Jake thinks maybe he should try exercising to pass the time. And without wasting any more time, start doing push-ups, a little further until he stops, while repeating over and over in his mind, so as not to lose his sanity, that his name is Jake, and he is a merchant from the planet AKBART. Then he silences his thoughts for a moment, and taking his face with his hand, he encourages himself that at least he hasn't lost his mind, and that he is conscious, and he only resigns himself to thinking that despite not being stronger than the creature to be able to defeat him, at least he will try to make his mental strength last, in case he manages to return to his normal life again. Then he smells his body, and he decides to take a shower. Not to look presentable for the thermos, but for his own dignity as a human being. However, when he prepares for that, the creature suddenly appears in front of him, and he looks as intimidating as ever. To which Jake replies that where he goes every time he leaves the cave, and that at least he doesn't appear dirty every time he returns. So what the thermos does is get closer to Jake's face, making a noise that the protagonist can't understand as always. Jake continues talking, and tells him that if he's going to do what he always does, he should do it now, and not waste his time, and suddenly Jake hears the creature tell him that he notices that Jake is always nervous in his presence. At that moment, the protagonist is surprised, trying to understand if the creature has really spoken to him. Then Jake comes over and asks if he can really talk, but he receives no response. Thinking that he was sure he had heard something, he even thinks he has gone crazy, that he is already having hallucinations, hearing voices that are not his. And he hears a voice in his head again that says he always forces him to want to talk to him, and that if he analyzes the situation, he can't make a sound. This further confuses the protagonist, who doesn't understand what's going on. And he tries to understand if the creature doesn't speak to him, how can he hear it inside his head? The voice in his head sounds like a robotic, but kind of like a deep male tone of voice. The voice that echoes in his head tells him that it's good that he can understand his voice now. Then the creature gives him one more squeeze and the voice in his head congratulates him, telling him that he has passed the first test. Jake is left thinking about that from the first test. Immediately the protagonist gets angry, pushes him, and demands why he didn't talk to him from the beginning and why he has been doing everything he has done with him. Annoyed, Jake tells him that from the way he expresses himself, he is not a race of inferior intelligence. But the creature answers that it is very scandalous. Then Jake confronts him, telling him that it's not being scandalous, it's just normal to complain to him. Then the creature charges at the protagonist and tells him that from the beginning all he's been doing is screaming, and adds that because he's very stupid, he still doesn't understand that. Then Jake asks him what he's talking about, and the creature answers that the protagonist must follow certain procedures to survive in the planet's harsh atmosphere. Jake then asks him what procedure he should follow. Thermo asks him if he wasn't on that planet to do business, and it seems that his landing was not the most appropriate. Suddenly, our protagonist gets angry and tells him that if he knew what the reason for his visit was, and knew that he was a merchant, why has he been doing what he has done to him? The Thermo lets go and tells him that it doesn't understand his attitude, that if he really is a businessman, then he should behave as such. Jake, still annoyed, yells at him asking why he wants a merchant and what kind of negotiation he wants. The Thermo just runs over his tongue, and Jake, frustrated, tells him that he doesn't understand anything, that he should explain it to him, because then there is a mistake, or he doesn't have the mental capacity to understand what is happening. The creature shows no signs of wanting to respond and just continues running its tongue over the protagonist's body, to which the latter demands that he not underestimate him by calling him like an idiot, that his name is Jake. Unexpectedly, the creature replies that it will take this into account when calling him by his name. And he also tells him that what happens is that they had not introduced themselves before, to which the protagonist responds that he thought he could not speak and in passing they did not understand each other. To which the alien tells him that it is true, although he admits that he has appeared 3 times. Jake takes a little courage and asks him what his name is. And the creature responds in a dialect strange to Jake, to which he replies that he does not understand him, and asks him to repeat it again. Again, the creature communicates by telling him something that cannot be understood. Then the protagonist tells him that he understood that his name is Kashan or something similar, that if he can't call him something similar. The creature continues and tells him that that is not really important, but at least it is better than him insulting him with nicknames, but Jake answers that those insults have been the result of the things he has done to him. And he insists on reproaching him for having done many crazy things to embody. The answer he gives is that because the mating process bothers him, that if anything he doesn't like it. Then our protagonist tells him that he doesn't like it, and also wants to know what he does the rest of the time. And the alien continues with his explanation, calling him by name and tells him that perhaps he is not a merchant, that therefore he must comply with the agreements to guarantee the negotiation. Jake waves his hands angrily, yelling that he's obviously a traitor, but they're not partners, and that's no way to negotiate. Furthermore, Jake tells him that they only need the planet's sulfur, and that he did not explain what the conditions were for carrying out the deal. The creature pauses and tells him that it seems strange that he doesn't know, and he tells him that the terms for the exchange of organic materials on the planet have always been one, and that until now no merchant has arrived without knowing it. Jake replies that he doesn't know what the terms are, and that he wants to know the conditions. The creature explains that they only want to produce a thermos, and after that they will be able to excavate the stipulated amount of sulfur. The protagonist is surprised by the answer and is left speechless, to which the Thermo tells him that it is the merchant's sole responsibility to carry it out. Jake just asks what he means by that. The alien tells him that it is difficult to extract sulfur with human equipment, so he won't be able to do it. Jake replies that he doesn't care. Jake replies that he can't believe they are using him as breeding stock, and refuses to continue, and doesn't want to do what they have been doing anymore. Then protagonist asks if the negotiation can be cancelled. The Thermo holding Jake asks him if he really wants to cancel the deal, since it is the first time someone wants to cancel a negotiation. He also tells him that other traders have made the same deal, and the terms have always been the same, of all those who have visited the planet, and that he is not cheating him. Jake steps away from the creature and tells it not to threaten him, and that he's not saying it's a liar either, just that he was never informed of the trade terms in advance, and although it's unfortunate, he wants to break the agreement. So the protagonist analyzes that if the planets of origin know the agreements and conditions, And despite knowing it from the beginning, they did not care that there were no applicants, and simply decided to send it recklessly. And it is questioned whether a government is really capable of sacrificing one of its own species, in this case a person, in exchange for obtaining a few trucks of sulfur, that is a shot in the back. Then the Thermo recommends that he do not suspend the negotiation, since his body has changed so that he can survive on the planet, and proof of this is that he can now communicate and understand sounds. And that, in a few words, means that it has become a host organism, capable of receiving fertilized eggs to ensure the life and birth of a new Thermo. A tear of worry and sadness appears from Jake's eye as he thinks that this planet has completely changed him. Thermo, standing right in front of Jake, lets him know that he is the one in charge of that place and that he should be very lucky that he saved him before reaching the change point, since that place is full of violent consummators and that they had no intention other than to plant their seed and leave him lying anywhere on that desolate planet. The alien explains that thermoses are composed of a single genus. Reproduction between members of the same species is completely impossible. And that is because their shells cook internally, due to the high heat coming from the shell itself. While the Thermo explained this to Jake, he violently grabbed him by the hips, opening his legs and introducing his third arm deep into his being, while explaining that because of what he mentioned before, the Thermo tribe allows other races that do not have a heat source to incubate their seeds. That said, it must be maintained at a high temperature until it erupts, referring to the planet's very hot magma, to explain that at that time an area with sufficient geothermal heat is needed. The Thermo releases Jake and stares at him as he looks at the third arm, wondering what the monster should be. He replies that only a strong being can withstand a terrain with enough geothermal heat. Of course, seeing Jake, we all know what that means. The Thermos explains that the animals on that planet are too small and already adapted to the heat to make suitable multiplying material, and that is why it was decided to bring new living beings to that planet. Thus they multiply by being born from a small egg, while those on planet Earth take the sulfur without any effort. Therefore these terms are the most appropriate for both parties, since they keep them in very good conditions. Jake, with a wailing voice, expresses that it is not right, that the situation is not good at all, and angrily he hits the thermos, exclaiming that this is not right at all, and asks if this is not crazy. Cursing the thermoses and those of planet Earth, Jake claims that they were recognized from the beginning, and also says that it was crazy from the beginning, and yet everything was abandoned, while hitting the abdomen of the thermos strongly. The monster tells him that the human race is really tough anyway, while grabbing him by the waist and holding him tightly. Jake exclaims to let him go, abruptly hitting the monster. He hugs him a little tighter and explains that most of the workers voluntarily became propagators, and that he feels that Jake probably has the same emotion, all while the protagonist angrily looks at the thermos and tells him not to be ridiculous, and why the hell is he looking at him. The thermos, with many decisions, explains to him that since that being will not fail, therefore he will not fail. The thermos holds Jake tighter and tighter as he exclaims, begging to be let go and not to get too close, while being forcefully squeezed over the chest and abdomen of the planetary native. From some portals caused by the sinister power of the thermos, some hands emerge, a little reddish but with a lot of strength. These hands hold each limb of the protagonist while he wonders what he is doing. The Thermo exclaims that it would certainly be an honor to make him a propagator for his species, while sinisterly smiling and pleading, asking with great enthusiasm and desire what the beginner Jake is afraid of. He also asks if it wasn't for the reason why he came to that small planet in the first place, because his planet was no longer rich. All this while he is equally held by the intra-dimensional hands that appear around the Thermo. Jake, on the other hand, answers that he did not act with nobility when it comes to this whole situation that he is going through. Dick exclaims that after all, they are a dirty species that are driven by instincts. And also, while he shouts, the thermos wonders if he does that, his vocal cords will be damaged, and if he should cover his mouth. So the monster sticks out its long, wet, and very long tongue, leaving a trail of slime around Jake's neck, all with great subtlety and momentum, while the protagonist worries and prepares for what is to come. The thermos exclaims inside that the priority is to get him to accept the situation while he moves his tongue all over our protagonist's abdomen and chest, impregnating its entire path with saliva from inside. Jake exclaims and asks the thermos if it has nothing else to think about but that. This is expressed in a furious and worrying way. The thermos determinedly continues dragging its tongue all over Jake's chest, while exclaiming to itself that it will be the same for him too. The fact of becoming one of the inhabitants of that planet means being one like them. The thermos tongue wraps very purposefully around Jake's third arm. Jake, with no more possibility of moving, exclaims that he really hates the situation he is going through, while the thermos with its tongue makes movements to extract part of the protagonist. The Thermo exclaims that he will consider it a positive sign, since the propagators say vibrant and healthy will remain strong no matter how many seeds are put in, to which Jake exclaims asking to wait for the monster since it is moving in a very striking way. The Thermo exclaims that it cannot tolerate being more active than necessary. So the tip of Jake's arm enters his tongue forcefully and goes all the way through, exclaiming that he believes it will go all the way. Check. Very hot and trembling all over his body, begins to show mixed emotions. The Thermo exclaims that humans are generally weak, and that they are easily derived under intense light, and quickly die with the light source. All this while the monster's tongue very subtly touches the upper end of Jake's third arm. And while his whole body is shaking, he exclaims that it should not be like this. The Thermos exclaims that being able to withstand the heat and survive means that his body becomes stronger, all while detaching his long and slimy tongue from the protagonist's third arm, while he observes the situation carefully, blushing and at a point of maximum feeling. The Thermos, observing Jake very closely, asks if he doesn't like progress, and that he doesn't understand why people are afraid of progress, and try to reject it, all while explaining to the protagonist that this is not the whole situation where everything stops, while again with him tongue completely wet a little further behind Jake's arm, inserting his tongue with great force and pressure to enter the protagonist. The Thermo tells him to calm down, and that he already asked him to stop. And he already did, so he asks him if he's acting capricious again, while he inserts his tongue more and more into Jake's area. The protagonist asks him to look, and wonders if they haven't installed enough seeds inside, all while he reaches his peak. Jake asks the Thermos to stop while it uses its tongue very forcefully and persistently at Jake's entrance. The protagonist tells him that he doesn't like the situation at all while he is blushing and sweating from the whole situation he is immersed in. The Thermos remains thoughtful, seeing the whole situation in which it finds itself, and with great energy he throws himself on the ground after having hidden his tongue while this happens. Jake looks at the Thermos, a little amazed at the situation he is in, thinking about what is going to happen right now. At that, the commander takes Jake again, while he wonders how he is in this situation and enjoys it so much. The commander holds him very tightly, lifts him up, and buries his third arm very strongly until he gets to the bottom of the matter. The Thermos rises, and with much more force, continues to make Jake writhe in his own sweat. The protagonist, with a 30-degree inclination, holds the Thermo commander by the legs while being benefited by the commander's third arm and weapon. The expressions of both beings express violent bites and strong facial expressions. The Thermo continues its work, teaching the human what it represents as an important being for the development of its species, all while Jake continues to appreciate the situation. Jake's final door is knocked on multiple times with great force. The Thermos once again uses its long, slimy tongue to leave a trail on the protagonist's torso while he begs it to keep doing it. The Thermos continues with great enthusiasm. Both beings express their satisfaction at knowing that the situation makes them feel fulfilled. Once again, the Thermos hits Jake's final door with force. All the while, he thinks that the garden needs seeds. The third arm of the Thermos again ejects seeds from one end to the other. Jake, seeing this situation, reaches a critical point in his existence and asks the captain to stop. Once Jake's body can no longer bear the situation, he is left shaking and sweating, while the captain's third arm is extracted from the protagonist's doors. Thermo asks Jake if he is satisfied since he fulfilled his requests, and Jake expresses clearly and precisely that he is indeed satisfied. The Thermo takes Jake's hand and tells him that he must continue and recognize the joy of being chosen as the seedling, and also asks if it is true that Jake has evolved in a better direction. He very angrily answers him to wait a moment, and that if he does that, something will press on his stomach. The Thermos asks him if he is still not satisfied, and further expresses that he knew that humans were greedy. But if that is what he asks, the Thermos can continue, all while the third arm once again takes its form. Jake says in an exhausted manner that he can't continue any longer while he lies on his side on the floor. Turning around, he tells the commander that he is satisfied, and that he is fine while he mercilessly reinserts his arm. He takes Jake by the arm again and puts the gun back in the holster. All this while the Thermos exclaims to itself that it should not say anything else later, and that it should ask for it on time, and that this is the last time it will accept its whims. The thermos, with all its energy, propels itself to introduce the entire arm until it touches the end of Jake, who, in his last screams, exclaims that he must stop while crying and strumming the floor. Jake falls dejected to the ground, expressing that he doesn't even have the strength left to stop the situation. In another scene, a completely arid desert, in which large, tall rocks with aerial platforms are found while it rains. Jake expresses that he is really cold, and when he wakes up, he realizes that the thermos is really gone. Jake Albert, in the area in which he is, manages to appreciate that despite being in a cave he sees the rain falling, and also wonders why, despite it being daytime, it remains dark, and he does not know if it is because of the rain. The protagonist, trying to get up, falls limply to the ground due to severe pain. Jake wonders, holding his back, about the moment he hurt himself. Furthermore, although he takes his body, he expresses why it must be in that place. He also remembers that a few moments ago he really wanted to turn his stomach with his third arm, and wonders why he was doing such dirty things. Strongly remembering the moment when he did everything that led him to be knocked down in that place, Jake wonders if he's going crazy for becoming a breeder, while with a slightly altered expression he places his right hand over his mouth, gagging as if he were going to throw up. Jake imagines the national security forces commenting that they will always help the reproduction of extraterrestrial bodies, all because of the contract he made on their planet. The protagonist, saying something bad, hits the wall hard, remembering that those people who made him sign the contract are beings who have lost the grace of God. He also exclaims that it was a wrong decision while hitting his face with his injured hand, showing regret. The protagonist reminds that he should not have left the army in that manner, and that he should have flattered his superiors in some way to get promoted. The protagonist, completely without energy and with marks on his body, walks very slowly through the cave, just to get close to the exit where he can approach even the rain. Jake realizes as he leaves the cave that the temperature is not warm enough, and that it is almost impossible to escape right now. Also, that day he doesn't know when it will stop raining, and he will just have to find out where he is. Jake, very worried, manages to find some claw prints on a rock. Approaching the edge of the cliff, he realizes that those claws were going up and down very frequently. The former soldier thinks that his physical condition may indeed be different, but he can still follow the tracks without any problem, and that this guy really seems convinced that he can escape from this world. Jake, seeing the great fall below his feet, thinks that it would be very reckless of him, and if he makes a mistake he could lose his life. As an intrusive thought crosses his mind, determining that perhaps that is also an option. As Jake gets a little closer to the precipice, he determines that everything that can be seen below is ground, but at least there are figures that appear to be trees. Also, think that these figures seem to be trees that have been burned by the sun and have become charred. Jake, with great determination and completely without protection, decides to go down the cliff, exclaiming that the situation he finds himself in is life or death, so he decides to risk going down carefully since he cannot continue living there with that monster. Jake, grabbing hold of a wet rock and descending progressively and carefully, means that he should descend very calmly. When he turned around, he was able to determine that they were not really burned trees, since they move a lot. Then a rock slipped from his hands and slowly fell. This screaming man slips in a free fall while trying to hold on with his feet, knees, elbows, and hands to the stone wall that is right in front of him. After a strong hit to the ground, many scratches and pains appear all over the protagonist's body. Jake opens his eyes, and he realizes that he is surrounded by many thermoses. Jake wonders if that's really why he's angry, and not because he left the cave. To which he replies that he really didn't know this could happen, and that the rest of the group didn't come closer on purpose, all while taking the thermos from his arms with great concern. Jake expresses that he is fully reflecting on the fact that he did something dangerous, while the thermos with its tongue cleans his facial wounds. Thermo explains that he understands what he meant, but can't simply ignore that careless behavior. Jake resignedly expresses that then. The thermos interrupts him and explains that the breeders must stay where they are because safety is a priority. Jake, very worried, runs after the captain and asks him what he really meant by that, while the other walks towards the exit to continue with his hard work. Jake exclaims to the thermos and tells him that he must wait while he raises his hands towards the captain, begging and imploring him to remain inside the cave. Jake runs after the thermos and wonders about the biggest threat to security. If that's what the captain said, there really must be something more dangerous than what he's already faced. It becomes day again, and it automatically stops raining. Jake manages to see the sunlight and understands that he has fallen asleep as he very slowly and sleepily opens his eyes. Jake expresses that it really doesn't surprise him that they told him that it was cold in the hole, all because at the top there was a hole that directed its entrance to the sky from above. Despite not knowing how it happened, Jake drinks water with great desire. He also wonders why the thermos makes him drink water in sleep, although he later answers himself, thinking that perhaps they treat him better than if he were in a cell. Jake wonders if that is at the entrance they went through the day before, as he finds himself looking at a large hole at the top of the cave he is in. He also manages to determine that this exit is approximately 5 stories high, which is represented by 7.5 meters. Jake is really resigned, and expresses while he is on the ground that it will really be impossible to get out of that place being alone. Then he enters a phase of regret, wondering where they went wrong while holding their hair with their right hand, and with much concern, they also wonder with much resentment if it was really their fault for not being in a poor neighborhood. Jake can't believe he was sold for a few truckloads of sulfur, and that he could actually work like a dog for the rest of his life to buy it. This one wonders if the situation really presents itself as a rescue. What would be the highest value given in life? Jake also begins to remember if people on the planet have become rich thanks to his sales, and if so, then his sacrifice is in vain, all while he finds himself without cover for his body and hitting the ground. Jake wonders if they would really consider and accept him if he managed to return to his home planet, all while he begins to imagine how the soldiers point their guns at him, even though he is standing right in front of them and is not doing or causing any inconvenience. Jake expresses that he is not even angry anymore, and that he might be able to communicate better with the thermos. This one also thinks that the point of view itself is different, and it is true that it is quite reasonable and superior to the human one, all while remembering what arose the night before when he was being deeply reviewed by the captain's third arm. He also remembers when the monster told him that it seems that was not what he wanted, and turned him over so he could reach as far as possible with his third arm. Jake wakes up again, a little excited by the dream he had and aroused the day before. The protagonist hits his face, asking to wake up from this great nightmare he is in, and that there is nowhere he can lean on. Jake automatically, despite complaining, connected with an interesting idea, and that is that it is really uncomfortable not having anything to do, so he lay down on the floor and ended up stating that he should do some exercise. 59 seconds of planks, and now Jake's explorer is completely exhausted and lying on the floor. This one remembers and liars that he should not get anxious, and that what they want is a body for offspring, therefore his life is guaranteed until he reproduces. Calling them a production slave is a powerful person, and he also believes that the other day it was emphasized that he was the owner of the land, therefore he should simply be patient with the whole situation that is crossing his path. Still on the ground, in extreme cold. Therefore, he manages to determine that the point where he is safer than looking for a new one. Jake wakes up in amazement, because he didn't really feel the presence of the thermos when it left some precious stones in his kitchen. Jake manages to determine that instead of dealing with the situation he is in secretly, it would be better to discipline him, all because he was not going to get food like the one he saw previously anywhere else. The protagonist, seeing the sky through the hole, expresses that he is completely uncomfortable, and that it is better to be scolded or spanked, and that it will end faster. Jake, to kill some time, starts singing, and yet the field artillery continues to sing above all. Our protagonist wonders between tears and sadness when they will return to rescue him. Jake enthusiastically gets up from the ground and turns his face to express that someone is in that exact place at the right time. Detailing the situation well, Jake declares that it was just the wind. Just then, Jake's stomach starts growling, making it clear that maybe he had a bad nap earlier and that right now he was in a strange anthill or something like that. Jake places his hand on his stomach and manages to determine that his stomach is moving and generating some tickles. He exclaims about what he feels in his stomach and how it is a little frustrating while he is hunky, touching his abdomen. Then his lower back starts to sound. Our protagonist, with a very worried look, turns his face to observe what is happening. Jake manages to determine that something strange was indeed on his back and is worried about it. What is achieved when stretched is that each of the vertebrae that are in his spine sound in unison, generating a very great satisfaction in the body of our protagonist. Jake feels a very strong pressure on his back, which he takes very carefully, and wonders what is happening at that moment. The protagonist still feels a very strong heat behind him, as he falls dejected to the ground. Jake, with nothing left to lose, asks for someone to do something fast to prevent further suffering. Jake demands that the thermos do it right then and there, while the thermos inserts its third arm all the way in with great passion so that Jake can release all his energy at that moment. The The protagonist lets out a sound that his body produced spontaneously, which makes him wonder what he was really thinking and feeling at that moment. He exclaims that what is happening to him cannot really be real. He also expresses that he would in no way want a situation in which he finds himself like the previous days, and that he likes it. As a pretext, he says that all this is because that monster has a foreign body. Dick wonders about the possibility that the great General Thermo caressed his third arm with his giant hand, all while visualizing it very clearly and in detail, all while imagining the memory of when Thermo took him by the waist and then turned around so he could insert his arm to the final door. Jake finds himself dragged on the ground, very worried, feeling a very heavy weight on his back. He also lies down on a pile of rocks to rest from the situation he finds himself in. Jake expresses that he quickly needs to place something on a spot on his body while trying to erase everything that arose with a single finger. Jake begins to use his hand to touch the deepest part of himself. By feeling very carefully, he can determine that this is not what he wants to feel. The place he wants to reach is a little further in, and despite sighing, he finds himself worried. The protagonist, on the ground resting, asks how Captain Thermo managed to make the protagonist have a feeling so completely different from what he is actually used to experiencing. In addition, it is remembered that the captain takes it in a completely different way than he is really used to. And it also makes him manifest different expressions and sensations in his entire body, including remembering the time he brushed his long tongue over our protagonist's chest. All evenly over it. The protagonist takes the same place that Captain Thermo took, while wondering if what he is doing is really right. He exclaims that what he is experiencing is not enough, and that he wants something more. That he needs a lot of Captain Thermo's third arm, and that he can't do it without him, remembering his body shape in great detail. He begins to try to enter into himself by applying in a similar way what the captain had done on him, however, despite doing his best. He goes into a state of frustration, as he thinks he's acting like an idiot for no reason, and if he hadn't gone down the cliff, then he'd be with him already. Jake continues to brush against the spaces where his tongue was in order to achieve his goal. Night falls, and darkness and cold invade the cave. While Jake continues doing exactly the same thing he was doing earlier, only ending up with the same exhaustion that his body had in the first few days, the thermos arrives at the cave with food, and thinking that he will definitely have come down that night to bring them food. At that moment, Jack will catch him, and then he will make sure to negotiate his greatest wish, all with a face which expresses satisfaction of everything that has arisen during those nights. Jake is really interested in this situation happening. The captain arrives and asks him if he was really awake, to which Jake enthusiastically watches him arrive. The protagonist jumps on him and asks him to forgive him, begging him on his knees and hugging him very tightly. To which the captain wonders what this individual means. Jake sadly looks up and worries about the situation. He expresses that what he is experiencing is enough, and that he has had enough time to reflect while he looks at the captain with great determination and firmness in his words. Jake tells the captain to make him feel good and to do it completely with his third arm until he touches his final door, begging him to take out what he has used previously right at that moment. The captain tells him that, as he said before, safety is the top priority for the players, but when he looks at him, he shows signs of emotional instability, to which Jake, very worried, wonders why that is, while the Thermo answers that it is why he gave him some time to be alone. Thermo asks if that was unsatisfactory, to which Jake, annoyed and very determined, answers why he talks so much. Jake understands that he is fine, and that he feels good right at that moment, and that he didn't know why he was so interested in him. However, the more time passes, the more he feels that he shouldn't have left him like that, saying this with great anger and hitting him in the chest. Jake thinks about why his third arm doesn't come out, and what he should do to excite that guy, who also wants to say is that he has been thinking about him during that day, and what he is thinking about is his. Just before finishing that sentence, the Thermo answers him that there is no need to say it out loud to understand what it means. 7 days were a long time for a person with excellent social skills to be alone. He forgot that his concept of time may be different from that of a human being, to which Jake expresses that he doesn't understand anything. So complacency is the only thing he asks of he, while the Thermo tells he to say it explicitly. Jake hits him, insults him, and says he thought he was crazy because he wanted to use him as a breeding ground, while his whole body is rigid in the direction of the thermos. Jake, who still has a lot of desire to do it. The captain also explains that he cannot do it alone, and that he needs him, which he buys occupation. He asks him if he is still angry with him, and if so, how sorry he was, he was really wrong. The captain states, and Jake is taken by the dimensional arms and wonders if that's all he has to say as he watches it with an indescribable desire. And although the new one was already mature, I didn't expect him to want to receive seeds so soon, which leaves he calm, Jake. And after all, humans are unpredictable. So why didn't he express his intention from the beginning? The thermos expressed to the protagonist. Jake tells him that that is indeed all he wanted, and that they should please start already, in which the dimensional arm enters inside Jake to be able to touch the deepest part of his door. The protagonist, with a face that expresses satisfaction and carelessness at the same time, expresses that this is all he needed, and that yes, that body odor is from the thermos. He decides to take his body completely through another entrance, describing the smell as a bit burnt and dry. At that point, the thermos strongly encourages the protagonist to bring his arm to the deepest part of his neck. The Thermo uses its dimensional arm, its tongue, and its third arm to reach the deepest part of the protagonist and thus be able to touch his door while he enjoys it, getting up and leaning towards the commander. The thermos really enjoys the situation, as it runs its long, wet tongue all over the protagonist's body. Without hesitation, he removes his third arm from his body and rubs it against his door until he enters him deep inside him being. Jake watches with great pleasure, closing one eye and reopening the other, while he cannot control the fluids that his mouth expels. Yes, it is pierced by the third arm of the thermos until it touches the final door multiple times. Suddenly, he finds himself calm, as the thermos runs its slimy tongue over the protagonist's face, and he feels it in a very warm and satisfying way. On the other hand, the captain repeatedly enters his arms into the protagonist's door until reaching the final door, which allows Jake to reach the point he has desired during all this time in which he has been alone. He drills the door again and again. Captain Thermo is doubtful and silent as he enjoys the scene. Jake simply cheers for the situation he is in and enjoys asking for more as time goes by. Jake tells the thermos that it really needs to wait because it's too deep as far as he's reaching with his third arm, while he's enjoying everything he's doing with great caution. The third arm starts to sweat and ask for a viscous liquid that really complicates Jake's situation. The protagonist finds himself in a high-temperature situation which has him crying and drooling while hallucinating. Once again, the thermos with great force introduces its third arm until it touches the protagonist's last door, making him look at the sky without hesitation and without worry. Jake says that repeatedly while being pierced by the third arm of the thermos. This third arm reaches the last door at the end of Jake, delivering the seeds to the seedbed. Jake is pleased with the situation he is in, and manages to determine that this was what he was waiting for. The thermos releases him for a second while Jake explains exactly what he needed. In another scene, dawn breaks and the sun can be seen through the hole at the top of the cave. Jake opens his eyes while he is very exhausted and realizes that it is already daylight. Turning his torso, he realizes that Captain Thermo is standing next to him. The protagonist stares at his large, sculpted body, wondering if it's really what it looks like when exposed to sunlight. He thought it was like a rock, but if he looks more closely, it looks like a... His thoughts are interrupted by a neck pain that has his life in shambles. While this is happening, Jake holds his neck with his right hand, worried about the discomfort. The Thermo tells Jake that he is moving again, noticing that he is now awake, to which he stares in surprise to see what his new expression is. The protagonist wonders why the Thermo sees him in that way, while the Thermo answers him how such a being is still awake. Then, the protagonist wonders why he slept in that place. Jake asks Thermo again to take him to the highest glory and that there has not been enough time for reflection. The thermos looks at him a little doubtfully. While he clarifies that he will do it, Captain Thermo takes the protagonist with his dimensional arms again and lifts him up, carefully carrying him. Jake exclaims that there is no turning back as he is carried by the captain. He also exclaims that whether he likes it or not, he should live on that planet, and if he doesn't have the captain's seed, he will go completely crazy. Jake asks the captain if he plans to go out that day, while the latter holds his arms with his dimensional arms. Furthermore, the Thermo answers that he should indeed go out when the sun's rays rise a little more. Jake asks him where he is going because he has always wondered, to which the term answers that he must go to productive activities, and since he is the owner of that land, he cannot neglect his responsibilities. Jake continues asking questions like what kind of occupation or position a landowner should have, and also asks if he is the king of that planet, all while the thermos delivers food to the protagonist. The thermos asks about the term king, and exclaims that the owner of the land is the owner, and that it refers to an individual who possesses a practically fixed territory. To which Jake wonders if he didn't understand the concept of a king, and wonders what's so special about having those lands, since he probably wants to be that king's princess. Thermo asks him if humans fight over territories, to which Jig looks at him with a poker face because of course that is something a real king would do with the territories on the other hand. The captain explains that it is very important to own the land there and that individuals without land die soon after. Jake explains that humans fight for territory, but dying without land is pointless. Then he wonders how it is that without his own land, his life is shortened. All while doubting and remembering his past life, he expresses concern. The captain explains that the thermos cannot carry out vital activities without a heat source, and that this planet has a problem in that its temperature decreases drastically at night, and that is why each individual must occupy the Earth avoiding the night, thus showing an image in which several thermos are in the fetal position to maintain the high temperature of their organism. He also explains that it is something very similar to what happens in that cave. To which Jake explains that it is definitely very cold in that cave at night, and that there is indeed nothing to lose, all while eating a little of what the thermos brought to the protagonist. The captain explains to Jake that he has a lot of land, and that he is giving it to productive slaves who work for him while they dig up jewels and stones from his land. To which the protagonist explains that he more or less understands why the thermos continues to explain that in the first place, they are weak individuals who cannot occupy the Earth by themselves. That's why he offers them work instead of living, and now he knows how reckless it was what he did back then by standing in front of so many thermoses, that even those guys can be weaker than Jake himself. To which he exclaims that he doesn't think the production slaves were very kind to him, and that he made a sound in front of them in which he seemed displeased. The thermos explains that they are only beings without power or land. Jake exclaims that when they saw him make that noise, they realized that he was a producer who could communicate with them, the humans. The thermos exclaims that they would have reproduced him, knowing that they were going to finish him off. To which he also exclaims here that he bets that they would implant seeds in him and throw them out there, which indeed sounds like something horrible, but he is in no hurry. Plus, he can afford to take responsibility for it if something happens, which he exclaims that yes, that's enough, he doesn't have to say anything else. To which the thermo asks where he gets all that from. That is the root of a plant that the mole of the earth gathers in his cave, all this while passing his slimy and long tongue over the face of our protagonist, while he also thinks that the production slaves are looking for him. Other landowners taught him what organisms like traders are similar components to the mole, and that they discovered it by giving 2 cubes of chaonium. The thermos tells him that he wishes they had asked him if it didn't make sense, and that this guy is also trying very hard. It tastes a little strange, but it is the root of a plant, so maybe it tastes better if he cook it. To which Jake also exclaims through his thoughts that if he had been asked, that it would not make sense. This guy was really putting in a lot of effort, Jake exclaimed. It is indeed a little dry, but since it is a plant that can be improved, it would all be a matter of using a little firewood and fire, so Jake took the liberty of asking the thermos if it minds being a little fire for its safety. Jake exclaims that if the thermos goes away, he has nothing to do, and with what to defend himself, and that he wants to do what is necessary, to which the captain exclaims that if he doesn't try to jump off some cliffs, it won't matter what he does, but always remember not to do anything dangerous. To which Jake, scratching his face, understands what he meant, and asks him if he has a knife that is not affected, and feels a little old, with the beard that is growing in him, and also asks the thermo captain if that is too luxurious, a request to which he answers that he does not have one, but he has to do it, he got it for him.